pride and admiration. That's how you feel after hearing news about good drones over Moscow? The fourth day in a row. Unknown drones are flying over the Russian capital and its surroundings. And here you have the full Ukrainian gift set. Explosions, airport restrictions, and fire teams near the Kremlin walls. And although enemy propaganda is telling the population fairy tales about supposed meteorites and space debris, the local soldiers have surrounded Moscow and the dictator's residence in Valdai with rings of air defense systems. But will it help? What kind of birds are reaching Moscow? This is what Mykhailo Meneliak's report is about.
For several days in a row, Ukrainian drones attacked Moscow. On the night before Monday, explosions were heard in the city and airports suspended operations. Mobile fire teams were spotted near the Kremlin itself. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that their so-called most powerful air defense system in the world intercepted and destroyed nearly 200 UAVs. In addition to Ukrainian drones, something resembling a meteorite was also seen streaking over Moscow. Among the Russian theories, it's said to be space debris. It's a pity it didn't fall on the Kremlin. Ukrainian long-range weapons are striking Russian regions. But what is the purpose of such strikes on Moscow?
The main goal is to destroy facilities that design and produce Russian long-range weapons. We need to strike at Russian defense enterprises that produce long-range weapons, such as cruise missiles. And the concentration of such enterprises is highest in Moscow and the Moscow region.
In addition to just the elite of the Russian Federation, there are also a number of strategically important facilities present, such as the Tactical Missile Armament Enterprise, which produces most of the KH-101, KH-555, KH-69 class missiles, UMPK modules, guided aerial bombs, and so on.
To strike military and industrial targets, to exhaust the military economy of the Russian Federation, and to show Russians that their state is actually not all-powerful and simply cannot protect them. Factories that produce the missiles with which the Russian army shells the homes of peaceful Ukrainians. Experts emphasize that such attacks on Moscow are a serious blow to Putin's reputation.
Pressure on Russia, because their authorities boast that they can solve all issues, that, well, they set certain demands for our country regarding ending the war on their terms, refuse to enter into any negotiations, and try to achieve their goals using armed force.
To strike Moscow effectively, you need to have high-quality means, gather a lot of intelligence, make the necessary calculations, and analyze everything. Which targets were prioritized during these 4 days of attacks is unknown. But it seems that the defense forces did hit something, at least on the night before Monday. In the area of the settlement of Kommunarka, which is part of Moscow, a column of smoke rose after an explosion.
Well, most likely it didn't just catch fire on its own, although in Russia things do sometimes catch fire by themselves. But with the number of drones we've sent to the Moscow region, something must have hit. There is no such thing as an impenetrable air defense, no matter how powerful it is.
The Flamingo missile was spotted in the sky when it was reportedly flying toward Moscow these days. And in the near future, it will be used more intensively.
It was semi-officially reported that 9 Flamingo missiles were launched. One of them apparently was headed for Moscow. It is known that there was one launch at Crimea, maybe 1 or 2 launches at Crimea, which is a shorter range of 300 kilometers. It is known from photographs that there was one Flamingo missile that the Russians managed to shoot down. Well, there were also some others, as far as I understand, launched at various Russian targets in different regions to test the ability to overcome local air defenses.
It seems the Kremlin started to doubt its own capabilities. Ukrainian cruise missiles and long-range drones have forced Russia to strengthen its air defenses around Moscow, intelligence experts note. In various districts of the Russian capital, S-300 and S-400 systems and radars have been deployed, forming a ring to protect key facilities. This is a war shown on a diagram that was leaked online. Air defenses have also been reinforced around Putin's residence in Valdai.
The Russian Federation has done everything possible to build such an air defense system, with involvement. Even building metal towers on which they installed Panzer systems to improve their technical capabilities, and so on.
They won't be removing them from the front line. They won't. Most likely they've already brought a large number of air defense systems there anyway. That means they've weakened the defense of some other targets, which we will soon be able to attack.
Attacks on Moscow and other regions of Russia will continue. The command has decided to expand the scale and geography of long-range strikes on Russian territory, Zelensky reported. Long-range capability is a component of independence and will be the most important component for ensuring peace. Alt asks. As for deep strikes, they must be fully implemented by the end of the year. Thanks to long-range weapons, Ukraine has exposed the enemy's weak points. The fact that Russia is lying about its strength is already clear. All over the world. Recently, the daughter of the U.S. Special Representative Kit Kellogg made fun of a Russian mobile fire group near the Kremlin. She said that she had been assured that Russia was a superpower, and Kyiv, in 3 days it turned into just 2 guys defending Moscow. Shame, Megan added. Hog. Mykhailo Meneliak, Alexander Kruglikov, details, TV channel Intermarathon, United News. And
about the blow. Financial. Sanctions against Russian oil giants recently imposed by the United States could cost Russia $50 billion a year. Such predictions were made by the president of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky is confident that there will be even more restrictions from partners. Western experts acknowledge that the sanctions from the U.S. are significant. It is a strong and important step. However, they warn that Russia and some importers of its raw materials will try to circumvent even such restrictions. Our colleague Svitlana Chernetska, together with leading energy market analysts, analyzed who and how will try to legalize banned Russian oil and how to prevent it.
The Shadow Fleet tanker Fury has already felt the impact of the sanctions. Last week, it loaded Russian oil as planned at the port of Primorsk. Under the flag of Sierra Leone, the cargo was headed to India. But as soon as news broke about new restrictions against Rosneft and Lukoil, the ship turned back and later even stopped in the Baltic Sea. Then the ship's destination was changed from Ukraine to Egypt. These chaotic movements indicate a lack of coordination among buyers of sanctioned oil. In
this first week, everyone usually tries to figure out who will be able to continue buying the product. And at the same time, they are trying to find a way out of the situation. So yes, we see that some companies in India, and there were even rumors that some companies in China want to refuse Russian oil.
In fact, the new sanctions from the US president have not yet come into effect. Companies were given a month to terminate all deals with Rosneft and Lukoil. The route from Russian ports to India actually takes 4 weeks. But even now, in places like Primorsk or Novorossiysk, oil is being loaded according to schedule. Tankers are leaving for export.
If you are a company buying oil from Rosneft or Lukoil, you risk facing secondary sanctions. These could potentially block your access to US payment networks. And that's a serious problem. So if you're an Indian oil refinery, this is now a potential risk.
These are Trump's first sanctions against Moscow. And besides their symbolic significance, they also have a very real economic impact. President Zelensky says this means a loss of $5 billion per month. That's almost half of Russia's earnings from fuel exports.
At this stage, President Trump imposed sanctions on the 2 largest Russian extraction companies. Together, they account for about 55% of all Russian oil production. But in January of 2025, the Biden administration also imposed sanctions on the 3rd and 4th largest companies. Altogether, these 4 companies account for about 80% of Russia's total oil production and exports. So this is a serious blow that significantly limits Russia's ability to export oil.
Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Moscow has already had to urgently restructure its oil sales system. Europe has refused it, and the flows have been redirected from west to east. But delivering shipments to India and China takes much longer and is more expensive. And since there isn't a line of buyers, they have to sell at significant discounts. Over the past 3 years, China has become the main importer of Russian oil. India is in second place. Before the war, it didn't buy any raw materials from Russia at all, as it was completely unprofitable. Turkey is third on the list. It mostly buys petroleum products. The 4th spot remains with the EU.
It's not enough to simply impose sanctions because Russia finds ways to circumvent them, usually within 1 to 3 months. So from this perspective, the Trump administration is finally sending a very important signal to others, to buyers who continue to interact with Russia, that there could be serious consequences. And this administration will try to ensure the enforcement of sanctions in the future.
These ships didn't end up so close to each other by accident. This is how oil is transferred in the open sea. And right before your eyes, sanctioned Russian crude turns into oil from the Marshall Islands or any other country. The origin of the cargo is instantly forgotten, and now it can be shipped to any country in the world, with the hope that the buyer won't be too picky. This operation is called an STS transfer, or ship-to-ship transfer.
For example, after the latest sanctions imposed by President Biden against shadow fleet tankers, we saw an increase in STS transfers in Nakodka in Russia's Pacific region. This means that some Chinese ports did not want to unload crude oil from vessels subject to sanctions. So they sent their own tankers, transferred the oil, and then imported it from non-sanctioned vessels. But this also increases operating costs and is also a good sign that the sanctions are working.
And this is not the only scheme Moscow is using. Over the years of the Great War, the Russian Federation has established a shadow oil economy. Its main tool is the so-called shadow fleet. This consists of several hundred outdated tankers, usually sailing under the flags of offshore countries. Offshores are also the main element in yet another mechanism, evading sanctions. When one shell company buys the raw materials, another transports them, and a third sells them again, changing the ship's flag and the documents regarding the origin of the hydrocarbons. It becomes impossible to track the entire chain. India, for example, buys Russian raw materials, processes them at its own factories, and then calmly resells them to Europe. But everything is legal because what is exported is not Russian oil, but Indian jet fuel. Thank you. So for New Delhi, giving up cheap products from the Russian Federation is a serious blow to the economy. But at the same time, it's a chance to get concessions from Washington.
The main problem for India right now is the 50% tariff that the United States has imposed against New Delhi. And this is starting to significantly harm the Indian economy. India is ready to reduce its purchases of Russian oil. It's a service for a service.
Be that as it may, analysts consider Trump's sanctions important, but they also note that there could still be surprises.
But I'm afraid that there could still be a reversal, for example, if President Putin decides that he wants to negotiate with the Americans. So let's wait at least another 2 to 3 weeks.
European companies with ties to Russia are urgently looking for ways to avoid sanctions or at least to delay them. For example, a subsidiary. Rosneft's companies and refineries in Germany have already received a 6-month postponement. They have been under Berlin's control since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. Slovak, Hungarian, Bulgarian, and Romanian refineries that process Russian crude are trying to understand what their future holds. Most likely, new owners will be sought for them. And this will mean selling without bidding and at a loss to themselves.
Russia's receipt of foreign currency mostly depends on oil and gas exports. I wouldn't say it's a fatal blow, but the sanctions will increase the pressure.
In any case, the new sanctions will force the aggressor to look for ways to circumvent them. And therefore operations become more expensive, and they will make life more difficult for the Kremlin elite.